Hello guys, welcome back to Faith Movies. Today's movie recap will be a comedy and romance movie from 2014 called Frank vs. God. Warning, there are spoilers ahead. The movie begins with two young preachers knocking at the door of a man named Frank to preach to him. Frank opens the door and sends them away with his gun. Because of this, Frank is arrested but later bailed out by his friend, who takes him home. His friend advises him to do more with his life, as Frank is a certified lawyer, one of the best. Frank gets back home to meet and play with his dog, Brut, who happens to be his only companion since his wife died in an accident. Occasionally, Frank is visited by a prostitute called Gina, who comes to keep him company. On one of her visits, Frank tells her that he will not be available the following week as he will be visiting his niece. So, Frank pays a little boy to take care of his dog and then leaves for his niece's place. On getting there, she is excited to see him, but he later finds out from her parents that she is very sick. The next day, while the family is praying together before they eat, Frank opens his eyes to look at the television and discovers that a huge tornado is approaching his house. He calls home but cannot reach anybody as everyone is evacuating the town. Frank is scared for his house and his dog, so he starts his car and begins to drive back home. On the road, he sees other cars driving away, but he continues on. However, he is pursued and stopped by the police. Frank tells them that he has someone special still in the house, but they refuse to let him go as it is too dangerous. While they are still talking, Frank sees through the police security camera that his house and dog are destroyed before his very eyes. Frank weeps over this and goes to pick up the ashes of his late wife, which he had kept in a jar some time ago. The following day, Frank goes to meet his insurance company to help him get a replacement for his house. But the company tells him that the tornado which destroyed his house was extraordinary and is considered an act of God. Because of this, the house will not be replaced, as this was already stated in the insurance contract. Frank is very angry at this, and even as a lawyer, it does not make any sense to him. So, Frank goes angrily to a church to query God for destroying his house. He demands that God has to pay for his house. Following that, Frank prepares himself, gets ready, and goes to the court to submit a lawsuit against God. The attendant sees this and is surprised. Frank goes to his friend, who is happy that Frank has finally made up his mind to do something since his wife died. But this excitement is cut short when he realizes that Frank is suing God in court. He tries to convince him otherwise, but Frank seems to have made up his mind. Frank begins his case by sending the lawsuits to various religious leaders, summoning them to court. As a result, one of the religious leaders calls Rachel, a retired lawyer, to help with the case. She refuses at first, but later agrees when she finds out that it has to do with God. The religious leaders, together with Rachel, begin plans to represent God. The first day of the hearing arrives, and Rachel starts by telling the judge that the case should be dismissed as there are not enough grounds for Frank's claims. Frank, however, states that religion serves as the entity representing God and should be charged for the destruction of his house. The judge, seeing that the case would benefit him, approves it. After the session, Frank meets Rachel, who asks him why he is doing this, but he refuses to answer. Following that, Frank goes with Rachel to see all the various religious leaders for discoveries and facts for his case. He also visits the insurance company to question them about their policy on the acts of God. After that, Frank employs Gina, who had been visiting him, to be his assistant in the case, even though she has to take a pay cut. The judge is happy so far at how the case is gaining traction as it would benefit him. Rachel and the rest of the religious leaders prepare for the next court session by praying to God. The day of the next court session comes, and Frank is given an opportunity to speak first. He tells the court, using various case studies, that he has the right to summon God to court and query him. He states that either God destroyed his house willingly or it happened because of neglect. Either way, God has to pay. The insurance company assigns another lawyer to help Rachel with the case. The second lawyer suggests that they offer Frank some money to drop the case as it is getting too popular. So, Rachel visits Frank and offers him $3 million to drop the case, but Frank bluntly refuses, saying that it wasn't just about the money. Frank's friend finds out that he rejected the money even though he is homeless. He isn't happy about it, but Frank seems to have made up his mind. Frank is still yet to dispose of his wife's ashes, even though he has tried several times. Following that, the second lawyer threatens Rachel, telling her to do all she can to win the case, or else leave it to him to handle. Meanwhile, Frank's niece is still very sick, so he goes to church to pray to God for her, even though he filed a lawsuit against God. The following day, in the next session, Frank blames God for all the evil things, saying that he allowed them to happen. The case goes viral on the news and gets a lot of people agitated by Frank's action. As the case is getting worse, the judge is advised by his partner to dismiss it as it is no longer looking favorable for them. The judge does so on the basis that the defendant, God, is not present and dismisses the case. Frank is not happy about this. He is about to give up, but Gina, his friend, helps them find loopholes that can give them more grounds in the case. So, they stay up all night to work on it. The next day, at the appeal session, Frank uses the Bible to prove that God is actually present and in the courtroom with them. He demands that God should be held accountable for the damages. Upon getting home, Frank receives a call from Rachel. She tells him that she has withdrawn from the case as it is now being handled by the other lawyer. Frank finds out that she is drunk and goes to her house to help her. Rachel wakes up the next morning to see Frank in her house. She is shocked and asks him to leave, but he insists, makes breakfast, and the duo eat together and talk. She appreciates him but still asks him to leave. It appears the duo are starting to like each other. While Frank is leaving, he invites her to join him to see a new rocket launch, and she reluctantly agrees. The next day, they go to the beach to see the rocket launch. There, the duo shares their personal life experiences and finally fall for each other. They finally return as Frank has to prepare for the final court hearing. At the final hearing, Frank summons God to the stand and asks him many questions that bother a lot of people. However, Frank admits that if he hadn't lost his house, he would still be isolated as a loner and would not have had the opportunity to meet his newfound love. On this basis, Frank withdraws his lawsuit against God, and Rachel is happy about this. He tells God that he will not ask any more questions. Unfortunately, upon getting outside the court, Frank is shot by one of the agitating protesters. He falls into a trance where he sees his late wife, who tells him that he is not ready for the answers to all the questions he is asking. Frank wakes up in the ambulance where he sees Rachel. He fully becomes conscious at the hospital where he and Rachel talk for a while. Frank finally leaves the hospital. He goes on a boat as he is now ready to let go of his late wife's ashes. He does so by launching them on a mini rocket. Frank's niece is now better and celebrates her birthday party, which he attends with Rachel. They all celebrate together. The movie ends with Frank finding a replacement for his dog, Brooke. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to give a thumbs up and subscribe. Your support is appreciated. Remember, Jesus loves you. Have a blessed day and see you next time.